Hey everybody, it's me, Angela Walters. Welcome to this week's live chat. I'm super excited to spend the next couple minutes talking about tips and tricks for marking out quilting designs on your quilt. Plus, if you're watching live, I have not one, but two giveaways. So, as always, Jessica is behind the computer monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions about what I'm talking about, be sure to comment on there. And then also leave a comment because she'll pick two lucky winners for what we're giving away. I'll talk about that here in just a second. So if this is your first time joining me for a live chat, I'm glad you're here. I get on about almost every Thursday at 3 p.m. Central and talk about something quilting related. And then if you're extra ambitious, you can get on about half an hour early and we type chat before I go live. So it's a lot of fun to get off on tangents and talk about different stuff. So anyway, like I said, today's live chat is going to be a little bit of recapping what's coming up. And then I'm going to share some tips and products that I like for marking out the quilting designs. Just because that seems like it's a question that gets brought up a lot and it's just something we can talk about. So hopefully you can find that helpful. Now, in the last week's live chat, I announced the upcoming Free Motion Feathers Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along video series. By the way, I feel like I could say that just in my sleep. It just rolls right out my mouth because I say it all the time. This is starting in July, and it's going to be a video series where we're going to quilt together, learning how to use feathers in different areas of our quilts. I am so excited for this, and I was so excited last week to get to announce it and get to tell you all about it. So if you're not sure what I'm talking about, you can click the link in the description box below. It will tell you all of that. So a lot of fun stuff with coming up with that. Like I said, we're going to be talking about how to use feathers in all areas of your quilts, like borders, blocks, backgrounds, how to create the variations. One thing I love to do is to teach, and to get to teach through videos is just a really fun way to get to connect and get that little bit of teaching, you kind of fill my teaching bucket there. So one thing I talk about though in any of my classes, it's one thing to know how to quilt a design. It's a completely different thing to know how to use it on your quilt. I mean, sure, you might know how to quilt a feather, but how do you put it in a block? How do you use it in borders? How do you work your way through those areas? And those are the things I'll be talking about in the video series. Like I said, this is going to start in July, so you have time. It's already the end of May, which is just crazy to me how fast this year is flying by. You have time to gather all your supplies. I like to go ahead and get the announcement out there as soon as I have all the details, because first of all, I'm super excited and I can't ever keep a secret. And also that way as life gets busy through May and June, you can kind of look forward to July when it's hot in most places and you can just kind of sit in your quilting room and quilt away. And like all my other video series, I've designed a exclusive quilt panel that goes right with the videos. So if you want to get that, you can. It's not required. You don't have to have it. I like to make my videos as easy as possible to join, because I know that quilting can be scary. That's why it's better to do it with other people, right? We'll do difficult stuff if other people are doing it too. But it's a great project to have. It gives you the experience of quilting on a quilt without having to actually piece it. And I won't spend too long on this. I know I went over this last week, but the panels are available in two sizes. So if you want something a little smaller, just a little bit tinier, that's perfect. If you want something bigger because you love feathering things till they fly, perfect. We have both sizes available for you. And still, for a limited time, you get the small panel half off when you buy the large one. So if you're like, I can't decide, you can get both of those using the promo code FEATHER. And like we were talking about in the type chat, there is a free collectible pin with purchase of panel while supplies last. So this is funny. This is something I started, I don't know, a few years ago. On a whim, I was like, oh, let's do a button or a pin that goes with the video series. And that way you can kind of collect them, kind of like a visual, like, look at all the things I've done. And so it's been kind of fun making the pins. I haven't done them for every single one, but for the most part, kind of getting them through there. So while we have supplies, you'll get a free pin with a panel. You don't need any promo code. We'll just throw it in there. But other things that are coming up, I've talked about the Quilt Walk. It's our big annual outdoor kind of quilt extravaganza here in Liberty, Missouri, just outside of Kansas City. And through the Quilt Walk, we walk through participating stores and get the pieces of a pattern. And the pattern is the spangled quilt pattern. So this is to celebrate the 250th anniversary of America. And so we just got like all the patterns and all the pieces. So exciting to kind of see that all together. But I know not everybody lives in the area or can't make it here. So if you want to order the kit, you can. So you can get that link in the description box below. So all you have to do is click on that and it'll take you to it. That way, if you're like, oh, I can't make it to Quilt Walk, something's going on, you can still get the kit if you want it. Speaking of pins, so I already kind of alluded to the fact that I put together a pin for previous challenges. And due to your requests, people are like, I didn't get a pin, or maybe you did a series later on, you didn't catch it when it came live. I went back and reordered all of the pins that we've done up to date, not counting this new challenge, and put them together in a pack. So if you want to buy them, there's a link in the description box. It's like $8.95, super cheap, but you can get those pins. So for all of those, everybody that's asked for them, that has emailed Jessica and begged for a pin, she swipes them off of no, I'm just kidding. She doesn't take them from me. So you can get past pins. But one lucky viewer is going to win the pin pack. So that's one of the prizes we're giving away today if you're watching live. Again, you can click the link in the description box for all of that. Now, for the next giveaway, I have 2 brand new stencils that I designed. And one lucky viewer or one lucky participant in the live chat is going to win these. So this will be the other giveaway. We're going to talk about these here in just a second. So stencils is what motivated the topic of marking your quilting designs out. That's kind of what brought this all together. So if you haven't already got these stencils, and if you're not the lucky winner, maybe you didn't leave Jessica a super nice comment, so she didn't pick you. I'm just kidding. You can still get those by clicking the link in the description box below. I've designed them so that they're nice and manageable. I don't love huge stencils. First of all, they take up a lot of room and they're hard to reposition. And these are like $8.95 a piece. They're pretty cheap. So if you need some quilting help, that will help you out with that. But the idea with stencils is kind of what helped me think of like, oh, let's talk about marking tools and tips for marking out our quilting designs. Now, I know I've talked about this before, but it's just one of those things that even during the type chat before I went live, everybody's suggestions, I was kind of joking with Anna. I was like, they're pretty much like writing my live chat for me. It's fun because there's so many different products out there and there's so many different ways that people do stuff. The good news is there's no wrong way, right? So I'm going to share some tips and things that work for me, the products that I love, but just take that for what it is. I'm just the expert of my opinion. You can definitely take that for what you want. Now, Marcia asked the question that kind of sums up all of this in the type chat. She said, is it a good idea to mark out the designs on a quilt? Definitely. Having those marked lines give you something to follow. If you are a brand new machine quilter and you're trying to learn a design, it's really hard to like look at it and then translate that here. Having those marked lines give you a guideline to follow. Think about how we learned how to handwrite or write letters. Our teacher gave us things to trace so that we can get the idea of how the design goes together. Now, that being said, marking out your designs is a tool to help you become more comfortable with quilting. If at any point, though, you feel like, I don't really need to mark everything out, then you don't have to. I think depending on the designs you're working with, depending on your comfort level, maybe you only mark a little bit. Maybe you mark out the whole design. Either one is fine. Whatever you will do is the important thing. But my goal here is to show you some different ways to kind of how I approach it, so maybe you don't have to take all the time to mark everything out. So first of all, my favorite tools. There's 2 main tools that I use, and the first one is the Mark Be Gone water-soluble marking pen. This is so old school. I think I probably used about 2 million over my quilting career. Okay, that's obviously an exaggeration. This marking pen is perfect because it's water soluble. So I can mark registration lines, we'll talk about that here in a second, and then remove it with water. This is just the first marking tool that I started with when I began long arming 23 years ago, and I've just always stuck with it. It's never not come out, it's never given me problems, so I'm just going to stick with it. Now, that being said, there are other marking tools that you might find helpful. Friction pens, or shoot, even a pencil. I remember Jeremy's grandpa, who did a lot of hand quilting, would mark out his designs with a pencil, like yellow number 2, good old pencil. Some people like washable markers, totally fine. But this is the one I use probably 75% of the time. Now, there are some other marking tools I use, but not quite as often. There's the air soluble pen, that purple and pink one. I put that on here because when I was first starting out quilting, I bought these thinking it was a water soluble marker. And I marked out all of these letters I was doing, and I came back the next day and it was gone. So I was like, where did it go? So just be sure that you know what you're working with. You don't want that to kind of disappear on you. Another tool, another pencil here that's on the right is the Ultimate Marking Pencil. Now, this is a chalk pencil, and it's made out of the same stuff as a pounce pad, which we'll talk about here in a second. I might use this if I need bigger registration lines. It's not super fine, so it's not going to be great for like necessarily marking stencils. But if I'm working on darker fabric where I can't really see the blue, then I might use just a good old chalk pencil. And that was a question that came up. Somebody asked, I don't have her name now, what's a good chalk pencil to use? Sorry, that was Cheryl. No, that wasn't Cheryl. Anyway, somebody asked, what's my favorite white pencil? So I like the Ultimate Marking Pencil or just a good old chalk pencil. And we'll see how I use them here in a second. But the idea is I just need something to quickly mark those registration lines. Again, use whatever you already feel comfortable using and always test before you start marking. Now, I would like to sit here and say that I always test it out before I go, but I have in the past marked out a whole quilt with a chalk pencil and it didn't come out. I had to scrub each line out and it was very traumatic because it was a customer's quilt and I'm like, I'm gonna make her so mad. It eventually came out, but if I had just done a little test spot first, I would have known and used a different marking tool. But live and learn. So I use this the water-soluble pen mostly for marking registration lines. My idea, or the way I like to approach it, is the less amount of marking I do, the less I have to remove. And so now that I've quilted for a long time, I don't necessarily need to mark out the whole design. I might use this to mark out registration lines so I can make sure, for instance, like right here, that this motif is centered in the block that I want it to be centered in. Kind of like a visual reference there. Now, that's not to say that in the beginning, when I first started machine quilting, I would have marked out the whole feather, for sure. But again, I think you should only mark out what you need to do to move on. So definitely registration lines, especially like if I want something to be very particular in a center or where I want it to be. But no matter how you mark your lines, please remember this. Those registration lines are guidelines. They don't have to be perfect. They're just helping you see where the design goes, how it goes together, and even if your quilting doesn't hit those lines perfectly, it's fine, because eventually you're going to erase those lines and nobody's going to know. So if you decide to mark out your quilting designs, do not get so frustrated while you're quilting that it's not perfectly on there, because those lines will come off. Now, all of you out there that are more perfectionistic, you might get a little little hives at the thought of that, but promise, once you take it off, it's going to be fine. So another thing I'll do is maybe I want to mark where I want a particular size design to go. It's just a visual clue hey, in this circle right here, I want a big circle right here. And it just helps me remember, okay, what I'm working with there. So since it just comes off, I just like to mark those quick little registration or little notes to myself. Now, one thing that I will talk about in a little more detail here in a second is I like to mark as I go. I don't sit and mark the whole quilt out. I'm marking those registration lines and those designs as I'm quilting. That way I can see where it's going to be, quilt it, and then I go ahead and put a little bit of water on it and then move on, because I hate getting to the end of the quilt and then having to remove all the markers. But that's just how I approach it. Another thing I use my marking tool for is to remind me what not to quilt. So I just saw this quilt and it kind of reminded me it's a quilt I did for Tula and it had the acorns and I wanted to do feathers on every other one. Well, I didn't want to forget which one was supposed to go where. One of the things about quilting on a long arm is as you're quilting, it's kind of going up and you can't remember exactly what you've done. So I took my marking tool and I made a big X over the blocks that I did not want to put feathers on, just in case I forget. So you can make little notes to yourself or whatever, but in this instance, I was using it to remember, okay, don't put something in this design. Now, sometimes though, even though I like to mark registration lines, sometimes I will mark the whole design out. And I know it's kind of hard to see here. This was the very first quilt I did for Tula Pink. And I wanted to do this scroll kind of motif in between the blocks, and I wanted them all to be exactly the same. In this instance, I would go ahead and mark out that whole design. So it really just kind of depends on what your goal is for the quilting design. If I'm quilting a big feather and I want the feather to kind of wrap around like this, then I'll just mark that spine out. But here I'm like, okay, I want it to be particular. I want it to be the same. So I went ahead and marked them all out. And here I have a little bit closer up picture. So especially for those more intricate designs that I want to make sure are the same all the way around. Now, I will say this was very early on. This quilt is probably, 18, 19 years old. I probably wouldn't do that design anymore because I don't like to mark it out. But in that moment, that's how I handled it. Another time I would use this is if I want it to be specific, like letters. Here you can kind of see this was just a piece of fabric and I was quilting this word drawn. So if it's going to be letters that I want to be very precise, it's too hard to freehand those perfect letters and have the spacing the way you want it. So in this instance, I actually printed off the letters I wanted, put them underneath the fabric, and then marked over it. And we'll talk more about other marking tips here in a second. So this is an example of when I would be using my water-soluble marker. Now, one of the things that I love about it is it's easy to mark. I feel like they kind of run out pretty fast. But one thing I don't love is the cap does not stick on to the back. So can we fix that? I think that would be great. I'm always losing this cap and then the marker's dead. So anyway, just don't lose the cap when you're working through it. So I kind of, whenever I prepare for my live chat, I kind of go through all old quilting pictures and find stuff like, oh, I go down like little memory lane every Thursday. But here you can see some registration lines that I'm marking out just so I know where I want to put designs. Oh, around this star in this first section, I want to put this, in the second section, whatever. And so that just gives me a roadmap to follow. Or in this quilt, this is a picture of a design we're going to learn in the upcoming Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along. I used my marking tool to divide that bigger block up into fourths. So even though I didn't mark out the feather, I created the space so I wouldn't have to worry about making it even. You can't see the marking because I took it off, but in that instance, you can kind of get an idea of how I would use it to mark those registration lines. All right, besides that, I love a pounce pad. Now, we're going to talk about this because I think the pounce pad can be kind of divisive for some quilters. Let me go over to the full screen so we can talk about this. The pounce pad is basically a chalk. It has like a little reservoir and a little pad, and this is what you rub over your stencils. This is such quick marking. So if I'm working with stencils, I love this. It's so much quicker. Now, when I'm filming, I will usually mark out the stencil with the water-soluble marker so you can see it on camera. But this is what I'm using all the time. Now, I have taught classes where people have said, my pounce pad doesn't work. If you have a brand new pounce pad, you really have to whack this sucker to get it primed. When I open it up, I should see, I don't know if you can see like little chalk flurries. I need to really pounce it to get it primed and then mark it out. If it's not flowing really freely like this, it looks like we're smoking something up in here, doesn't it? Pounces everywhere. It won't mark really well. So make sure that it's primed so that you can do it. And you really have to smack it. You gotta smack it like it owes you money. If I'm quilting on my long arm, I'll hit it on the frame a little bit and it sounds kind of aggressive. That usually means nobody comes in there because they're thinking something wrong has happened. So make sure that it is primed, and as you're marking, you'll want to kind of smack it some more times. Jessica's laughing over there, and it is cracking me up. Anyway, so make sure that it's going. So if you have a brand new pounce pad, you have to keep going until it's primed. Now, one of the things that came up in the type chat was, the pounce pad is like very loose chalk. So what happens if it comes off? That right there is why I love the pounce pad. You just brush it off. Like it's so just kind of floating on there. However, if you're like marking the whole quilt and you want to make sure it stays in place, some people suggested in the type chat using hairspray to lightly mist it in place. And I was telling Fuzzy Face Place and other gals, I was like, how about Aquanet? Sure enough, I have Aquanet here in my studio. I was like, listen, this is... Now, I can't say whether or not to spray this on your quilt, but I'm just saying I had Aquanet for my hair, and it might work for your stencil too. But that is why I like to mark as I go. So if I were going to do, let's say, an edge-to-edge design over the whole quilt, I would maybe mark out one row and then quilt it, and then mark the next row and quilt it. Because the more you shift the fabric, the more that chalk can come off. But ultimately, that's what I love about it. Especially when I would quilt for customers, I was always so hesitant to use water to remove markings. Because if a customer gave me their quilt and I sprayed it with water and that fabric ran, well, now that's my fault. But if they take it home and they spray it and it runs, then that's on them. So that's why I like to kind of mark as I go. Now, pounce comes in several different colors. I use the plain white most all the time, but if you wanted like blue, if you're using white fabrics, these things last forever. So you don't need a whole lot of that to work, especially the way that I'm using it. So again, this is going to be for stencils, where I'm wanting to quickly mark out the designs. When I'm working with stencils, there's two main kind of stencils. There's the plasticky ones, which, I mean, obviously we've seen these before. When you're picking out stencils and trying to think what designs do you want to work through, ask yourself, what designs do I struggle with? And then get a stencil to help you out with that. Not every stencil is for every quilter, right? So if you're like, I can't do the swirl chain, I'm really struggling with it, a stencil would be helpful for that. But if you're like, no problem. I can do that easy, then I wouldn't worry about it. But when you're working with stencils, there's two types. There's continuous line stencils like this that are meant to continue on over an area. Make sure they have registration lines. This is what's going to help you, registration points. This is what's going to help you quickly and easily reposition that stencil across your area. Again, the design that you pick just really depends on what you want to work with. There's also block-based designs. So these particular designs are just the design goes down in the area, you mark it, and you continue on. So if you're newer to machine quilting with stencils, you might find those easier because you're not having to, repeat it across a whole area. Now, when it comes to stencils, though, you kind of see these are a little bit different. There's the plastic ones, and then there's these stencils that are called full line stencils. Now, these are so cool. What I love about them is they're basically like screen print. They're nice and, foldable, rollable, but where it's white will allow the chalk through. So you have to use a pounce pad with these stencils. So that's how you're going to get those marked. You can't use the water-soluble pen with here. However, the plastic ones, you can do either one, depending on what you want to work with. Now, a stencil that I use a lot, I mean, if you watch any of my videos, I talk about these, is the Designs with Lines stencils. So I like to mark registration lines. I don't necessarily mark out the whole design because I kind of know how it goes. I just want to make sure it stays. And so this particular stencil will center over a block and help you find the center point really quick, the midpoints on the sides, and then the corners. So again, a nice quick way to mark those reference lines. Then I can just go and quilt maybe curves that go to each one and create my motif or what have you. So lots of stencils available out there, lots of different designs. You can look through them and find the ones that you want to work with. The one caveat I would say is make sure that a stencil that you get, especially if it's one that is repeating, make sure that it's not a hand quilting stencil. You want it to be a continuous stencil. I want to be able to start and quilt the whole thing without having to start and stop, right? And hand quilting stencils aren't necessarily like that. When you're hand quilting, you have the ability to cheat that needle through the fabric. Well, here, we want to make sure that it's continuous. All the stencils we sell on our website are that way. They're not made for hand quilting, so there is that. So anyway, lots of different types of stencils, lots of different sizes, lots of different ways that you can use them. Now, no matter what stencil you use, though, when you mark out the design, remember, eventually you're going to take those lines off of there and you're not going to see the quilting anyway, or the marked lines. So try not to obsess too much about getting the quilting perfectly on the stencil. It is a guideline. When you're quilting, try looking ahead of the needle, look where you're going, like where you're heading, and then trust your hands to bring you to there. Even if it isn't perfect, eventually you're going to remove those marked lines and see the beautiful quilting. So I can't stress that enough. I think sometimes when we have that line to follow, some of us will try really hard to make it perfect and try to really make it hit that line, and actually that's going to look worse. If the line is smooth, even if it's not perfect, it will look good, as opposed to a line that is really kind of jagged because I'm trying really hard to hit those points. So again, I can't stress that enough because I know we have some newer machine quilters out there that will get frustrated. I promise eventually you're going to take it off and it's going to be totally fine. Now, a couple other things before I answer any questions. Other marking options. So these are just the way I like to handle my quilts. I like to mark it as I go. I like to use my tools that I feel comfortable with. I realize that the older I get, the more I'm like an old dog, like old dogs with new tricks. I'm like, I don't know, this water-soluble marker is fine. But there are some other options. You can sew directly over paper. So there's golden threads paper. You can print out on some thinner paper and put it right on top of your quilt and quilt right through it. And that would be a guideline. That's really nice because you don't have to take the time to mark out your design. Anything you can print, you can use. One thing I don't love about it is sometimes the paper will want to shift. So use pins to hold that down. That will definitely help. One thing I used to love to do, especially when I would do more marking out, I would mark out designs on freezer paper, especially if it's a bigger motif and I wanted to repeat it again and again. That way I had this kind of template. And from that point, I can either sew through that, take my thread out of my needle, pierce or perforate that line and use it like a stencil, or put it underneath the quilt and mark through the fabric. So that's one way I like to do that. And then another thing that came up in the type chat was press and seal. So that's kind of fun. Watch out though with press and seal, sometimes it gets stuck in there. It's hard to rip off. So great options. So the questions that came up before I take Jessica's questions is, what other tools can you use? Like what should you mark? And I kind of hit that, whatever you feel comfortable doing. If you're working on a whole cloth and I know I want this butterfly shape and I want it to work around, that's not one that I can easily freehand or just wing. So I might mark that out, whatever you feel comfortable doing. But as you're quilting, ask yourself, okay, did I really need this? Could I maybe mark out part of the stencil and not all of it? Maybe you get to a point where you don't need it anymore and you can pass it on to another quilting friend. I kind of joke, or I've talked about, when I learned how to quilt feathers, I could not get it. I just could not do it. And I ended up buying a feather stencil, and I would mark out that whole stencil and I would quilt the whole feather. Then it got to where I could just mark out the spine and one side of the feather, because I was much better on one side of my feather than the other. Then it got to where I only had to mark out the spine, and then I didn't need the stencil anymore. So it's a tool, but it's not a crutch. So don't feel like you have to, unless you like, taking your time and marking all that. Another question that came up, this is a great question. How do I store my marking tools? Well, you all need to know, I am not the most organized person in the whole world. This little bit that you see is like the cleanest part of my whole room. So I don't have a really good method. I'm always constantly losing these, so I always have several. But I will say how I keep most of my supplies near my long arm. I have like a little 3-tier cart, and on the very top tier, I have a letter organizer, and that's where I stick my rulers and my pins and anything I don't want to lose. So that's kind of how I do it. I would love, though, for any of you to leave a comment on the video saying how you store your tools, because I always love tips, and I know other people would definitely appreciate your suggestions. All right. Then Cheryl asked, can you do a pantograph with a domestic machine? Now, a pantograph in a long arm realm is where I have a design that's laid out and I'm tracing along it with a laser light while the machine is quilting. So I'm kind of not even looking at the quilt, I'm looking at that design. You can on a sewing machine, but it's going to be different. You're obviously not going to move the sewing machine or follow a light, but you can take a design like this that repeats and repeat it over the whole quilt. That's exactly what these kind of designs are for. So it gives you the effect of a panto, and all over design, you're just marking it out and then quilting as opposed to tracing along. So hopefully that makes sense. Anyway, any questions, Jessica? I'll be back next week with another live chat. Topic is to be determined. I don't know what we'll talk about. So it'll be kind of, we'll see what goes on with that. How do I quilt a pieced project with lots of points coming together? Oh man, bulky points. The more bulk you have at that corner, the harder, obviously, it is to quilt through it. One thing that might be tempting is to go close to it and then not go over it. Well, what happens is you get a little bump in your quilt. So if I have a really bulky seam, I'm going to try to pick designs that are going to work around it without coming right up to it, because I don't want my quilting to come right up to it and like point it out like, hey, check this out. Sometimes that's not possible though, especially if I'm doing an all over design or like every point is bulky. I'm not the best piecer myself, so I have a lot of experience quilting through my bulky points for myself. In that instance, if you're working on a sewing machine, using the foot that is like the hopping foot or the more dynamic foot, I don't think I have it handy. This one. This little foot, it kind of jumps up and down as you're quilting. That might help you kind of get over those bumps. Sometimes on the long arm, I'm like, oh, let's just try to go through it. I really try not to raise my hopping foot on my long arm ever. So sometimes I just have to avoid it. Hopefully that helps. Have I ever had trouble getting the blue marker out of a quilt? I have not. But like I said, I'm marking as I go. So this marking tool is not on the quilt very long. I'm not marking it and then coming back in a year to quilt it. And as soon as I'm done with that area, I just give it a quick spritz with water or a Q-tip in water and go ahead and erase it. So I try not to tempt fate. I like to get it off there as quick as possible, but I've never had trouble with it coming off. Do I mark before or after I sandwich the quilt? I mark after I sandwich the quilt. Now I know that's not ideal because the quilt is gonna be all kind of bumpy, but I don't want to mark it all out and then when I'm sandwiching it, like have the chalk come off. So I'm definitely gonna do it as I'm going after it's done. So, but again, everybody is totally different. Like that's, do whatever you want to do. Great question. Can I define registration lines? That's a good question. I guess I should think about that. So when I talk about registration lines, I'm talking about points that I'm using to help me position my design. This might be a good one to do a whole live chat on. So like, for instance, if I'm doing a motif that comes out to the center, I might mark that center dot as a registration point. That's where I want all my lines to go to. And if I want the points of the motif to come to the corners of the block and the midpoint, I might mark that midpoint just to have a visual that I can connect to. I'm not necessarily marking out all the curves of the design. I'm using those dots to kind of connect them. So that's kind of how I'm using registration lines. Or like we saw with that first picture of the motif, maybe I'm marking out where I want that spine to go as a registration mark, not necessarily worrying so much that the quilting is right on top of it, but just giving me something as a guide. Help me get that design where I want it, keep it registered on the quilt, keep it where I want it. So hopefully that makes sense. Any issues getting pink or blue chalk off of fabric? No, I've not had any issues, knock on wood. But again, just like the Mark Be Gone water soluble marker, I am not leaving it on there forever. I am marking it, quilting it, and usually once I quilt over that line, it just kind of goes away, brushing it off. So be very, very wary of using an iron on anything that's marked that has not already been removed. So I'm not going to like mark out my design and then quilt it and then for some reason iron over it. I don't want to set it. So just refer to the manufacturer's instructions because you just definitely don't want to have anything like that happen. All right, great questions. Again, if you're not watching live, leave your questions in the comments. I get on there from time to time to answer them. And we have 2 lucky winners. The winner for the stencils is Deborah Leach. Deborah, email us and we'll send those to you. And then the winner of the pins is Cheryl Hulse. I hope I said that right, Hulsey, Cheryl. So both of you can email us at customer service at quiltingismytherapy.com. We'll get that sent out. If you're not Cheryl or Deborah, I'm sorry, but you can click the link in the description box below and get all of the details on all that stuff. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you spending time with me this Thursday. I'll be back next week with another live chat. Until then, everybody, happy quilting.